Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Wakefield. I am in my second year as an MDiv student, Masters of Divinity, here at St. John's. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about social doctrine and how it connects to the seventh commandment. So let's talk about stealing. Take only what belongs to you. Do not take what doesn't belong to you. Do not steal. These are all ways that we talk about the seventh commandment. But what does it really mean? So first, a story. The first time I distinctly remember studying the Ten Commandments, I was in third grade. It was a test for my religion class, and it was in a moderately conservative Catholic school in the suburbs of the Twin Cities. So we learned a lot about traditional and pre-Vatican II views. So for me, the seventh commandment was always don't steal. But I thought that it meant simply don't take a candy bar from the grocery store. And I worked so hard on memorizing these commandments for this test. I had my parents quiz me. I fell asleep reading the book. I wanted to be a good Catholic and get all of these commandments right. But being a good Catholic is so much more than knowing what the commandments say. It's understanding what they are in a modern world. It's living them. It's truly believing them. And that's not something you can teach a third grader on a test. And I'm not sure I really learned what the seventh commandment, do not steal, meant until I was in my second year of college. It was spring semester. I was taking a course on diversity in the Christian community. And it was the first time somebody had introduced to me the idea of fair labor as being a way to obey the seventh commandment. So when I had this revelation, I realized that my understanding of the commandments, and specifically the seventh commandment, needed to evolve as I was. And I was no longer this 8-9-year-old third grader who knew not to take a candy bar from the store or to borrow something from one of my friends without asking. I knew that I was supposed to obey my parents and do the chores they told me to do when they told me to do them. But beyond that test, I didn't learn what it looked like to live the Ten Commandments in the real world. And so this is exactly what the Catholic Church is doing with their social doctrine. They are taking the seventh commandment, do not steal, and they are putting it into practice in our world today. And, oh dear. So a little bit of technical difficulties, oopsies. So the social doctrine, it has its grounds, its roots in the Bible and the Gospels, because that's where we hear about our worth and dignity as humans. But it also is explored a lot in several of the papal documents during the 19th and 20th centuries. And Rerum Novarum was the first one of the two I'm going to talk about. And it dealt with the rights of workers. And so ensuring that, or bringing attention to the fact that during the Industrial Revolution in the late and mid 1800s, there were people working in what we would call sweatshops. There were dangerous conditions with not a living wage, and they were expected to work long hours. There was child labor, and these new practices came because they had the technology to make things quickly and efficiently, but they needed human labor to do it. So Rerum Novarum was raising attention to some of the issues that were coming up with labor in regards to the Industrial Revolution. Centissimus Annus is the document that was released on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, and it also addresses conditions of workers and brings up more ways that we should be conscious of workers' conditions, especially thinking about the changes that happened with technology and manufacturing and farming between 1891 and 1991. So it was a look at how have we made progress and where do we still need to be. There is also, Gaudium et Spes is one of the more famous documents from Vatican II that talks about the church in the modern world. And one of the things it really addresses is our inherent dignity as humans because we're God's creatures. And as God's creation, what duties do we have to ourselves, and what privileges and rights do we have inherently? And so the the social doctrine draws on Gaudium et Spes because of that component of dignity, but also because this is where the church makes the assertion that she can weigh in on moral and ethical judgments in certain circumstances, such as when the fundamental rights of a person or the salvation of souls requires it. And so this is where we're able to make declarations as the Catholic Church and say these conditions are fair and just and honor the dignity of persons versus these conditions which are unfair and violate humans' dignity. And so what is the social doctrine? It's a set of guidelines that help shape ways that we can engage in economic affairs in a moral way. It's also the reason we can engage in economic affairs in a moral way, or the way that the guidelines shape that, is because we have the truth about human dignity from the Gospels. And so the documents that I mentioned earlier, Centesimus Annus, Gaudium et Spes, Rerum Novarum, they're documents that try and deal with this question of who are we as God's creatures and what does our dignity look like? And so the Catechism of the Catholic Church draws on these documents to craft this social doctrine. And it says that because we have this truth about our human dignity, we reveal our vocation to the communion of persons. So we have a duty to live in community with each other. And we have to learn the demands of justice and peace in conformity with divine wisdom. So we have to be living out our lives in a just and peaceful way in community. And it's the social doctrine is also a teaching that's a body of doctrine. So it's not just one statement, but it's a body of doctrine that draws on history, other documents, like I said, which are part of that history, and the Holy Spirit, in order to grapple with what has been revealed by Jesus Christ. And there are three main principles for deciding what is ethical or just for working conditions. And they all center around the end goal. If the relationships are solely based on economics, it's not moral because it's contrary to the very nature of the human person, because it violates that dignity, that call to relationship, that call to equality. And if economic profit is the end goal, that is also immoral because, again, it violates the dignity, the relationship. And if you want more information, I can put up the sections from the documents, which is where the CCC was pulling these guidelines from. And so finally, any system that abuses the rights of individuals violates human dignity. Any system. And so we're thinking about, what does this mean in today's world, and how does this connect to stealing? Because any system that abuses the rights of individuals violates human dignity. That, for me, is one of the core tenets of the social doctrine, because it's any system. In any system in economics, any system in school communities, any system in the judicial courts, any system that abuses the rights of individuals violates human dignity. So the social doctrine was we see it being created in the 19th century with Rerum Novarum and the Industrial Revolution. Centesimus Annus, 100 years later, in the 20th century, was addressing some of those same issues, but also seeing where we needed to go. So where do we need to go in the 21st century? Where do we see where do we see systems that are violating the rights of human dignity in such a way that is stealing from them? We see it in our shopping habits, our technology, jewelry, food, clothing, and I'm sure you can list a few others, but think about our shopping habits for a moment. We live in a world of Amazon Prime. Almost anything you want is at your door in 2 days. If it's not Prime eligible, it's probably going to be there in 7 days. But do we stop to think about what it takes to get that package there in 2 days or 5 days or 7 days? And thinking about all the clothes on Amazon, we might be able to find some relatively nice dresses, pants, shoes, accessories for cheap. And we wonder, how can they make it this cheap? And then maybe we notice it's coming from China and it'll take closer to 7 or 10 days to arrive. But have we stopped to think that it costs that little and will be there relatively soon because we might be exploiting workers on the other end of that supply chain? Our technology is full of precious metals and minerals that are hard to mine, they're dangerous to mine, and they're expensive. And yet we all have cell phones, smartphones, computers, iPods, iPads, tablets, TVs, you name it, and we're using these minerals that are a finite resource. And we hear about the conditions under which these workers are trying to mine these minerals and metals for us. And they're long hours, they're dangerous, and they don't have a living wage. We wear jewelry that may have diamonds that were unfairly mined. Are they what they call blood diamonds, where people fought and suffered and resources were wrongfully taken from those whom they belong to just for us to have a pretty ring? And even our food. There's a push to shop local foods, but have we thought about why? Because when we buy bananas from somewhere in Central America, we may not know that if those workers received a living wage, if they worked reasonable hours, if they were safe. And these are all systems that are stealing from these people because it's taking money and dignity. And these are systems that, if my screen will scroll up, these are systems that abuse the rights of individuals and therefore violate their human dignity. Let's talk about a specific example. I'm assuming most or all of us have heard about the sportswear company Nike. In 1991, they got in a little bit of hot water because there was an expose about their poor working conditions, how they mistreated their workers, and their poor wages. Then by 2017, they had reformed some of their ways and were getting a better reputation. But then they blocked third-party labor rights experts from evaluating their practices. So while this is not in it of itself an inherent violation of workers' rights or dignities, it made it easier for Nike to behave in a way that does not support human dignity. And so in 2018 and 2019, they had some scores in the Fashion Transparency Index, which deals with these issues of fair labor. And they had a low score in 2018, but it improved in 2019. And so that was a sign that even though they blocked these third-party auditors in 2017, they were still trying to improve their ways. But look at what their score was in 2019. It was 57 out of 100. And that was a 21% increase from 2018. But that 57 out of 100, if I got that on a test, that would be an F. So what do we do with this? How does social doctrine apply here? Because these are systems that are violating the rights of workers. How does the seventh commandment apply here? because we are stealing from these workers. Every time we make a purchase that uses unfair labor practices, abuses workers, or takes advantage of their vulnerability, we're stealing from these workers. We're stealing money if they don't have a fair wage. We're stealing their dignity if they don't have fair working conditions. And we're stealing their dignity if they don't have a living wage, because that means that they don't have access to reliable shelter, reliable food, clean water, sanitation. All of these decisions that we make when we shop are affecting other people on the other end of the supply chain. And the social doctrine is a way to raise our awareness about what we're doing with this. And so using those 3 guidelines about looking at the economic end goals, the status of the relationships, and the conditions, that we make better decisions about what companies we support. Do we support companies like Nike in 1991 when they're exploiting workers? Do we feel more comfortable supporting them in 2019 because they have a 57 out of 100 on the Fashion Transparency Index? Or do we not yet feel comfortable supporting them because they only have a 57 out of 100? These are really complex questions, and it's not something I can answer for you, and it's not even necessarily something that you can answer for yourself right now. But these are all issues we have to think of because we're an increasingly globalized society that relies on fast and cheap. And sometimes that means exploitation of workers. So the social doctrine forces us to look at the decisions we're making, because the 7th commandment is so much more than just don't take the candy bar from the store. Don't borrow the toy from your neighbor without asking. It's every action we make has a consequence. And are we making decisions that uphold the dignity and worth and rights of those who are helping provide for us? Or do we take advantage of them? So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And next time you're thinking about the commandments, think about what it looks like in a modern world. Thank you.